Welcome to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. I'm KM Weiland, and I am here to take you deep with story theory, writing techniques, and the incredible wisdom of story. I believe story is the greatest power on this earth, and that as writers, we carry the torch of wielding that power with responsibility, passion, and skill. There's no such thing as just a story. Today, it is my honor and my purpose to help you write your best story, astound the world, and maybe change your life. Hello and welcome. You are listening to Season 17, Episode 26. What would stories be without their long, uncertain second acts? Imagine if characters stepped straight from their first challenge to their final revelation, skipping all the struggle and wandering in between. Would the thematic truths they discover carry the same weight? Would we even believe them? Although the second act may look like just the middle of the story, it is so much more than that. The second act is story's beating heart. It is the place where characters are tested, stretched, and transformed in ways that make the ending not just possible, but powerful. In many ways, the second act is the story. The first act is setup, it's the question, and the third act is payoff, it's the answer. But the second act is the argument. It is where the story is developed in a causally realistic way and where the story's underlying thematic principles play out. In many ways, the general storytelling principle show, don't tell is specifically about the second act. This is where the meat of the story's development and transformation unfold. Without it, the story would feel either too didactic and or unconvincing in its final premise. Earlier this year, a supporter on Patreon emailed me wondering about the importance of the second act in story structure. This person asked, why is the second act needed? For example, in Toy Story 3, Woody gets the answer that loving someone doesn't mean being there for them physically. And he gets the answer basically in the very last moments from Andy and his mom. It's like Woody could have just learned his lesson by just staying in Andy's room. If that's the case, what was the point of going through daycare and Lotso? What's the point of a second act in general? Just to flesh out all the possibilities and nuances of both sides of the argument? So there's action. So in real life, we can just bypass the trials and tribulations of the second act and just learn the wisdom needed to change. Now, this is a reasonable question, and in some ways an astute one, since it cuts to the heart of story theory. Instead of assuming stories must be constructed in certain ways just because that's the way stories work, it's always worthwhile to look deeper. Why are stories the way they are? Why have storytellers so consistently found it useful to develop meaty second acts? Now, for starters, this discussion assumes one is interested in telling stories as acts at all, which of course is something of an arbitrary conceit. Regardless of the argument about terms, however, we understand that any story with an arc will consist of a beginning, middle, and end. Indeed, any grouping of words will necessarily include a beginning, a middle, and an end, if only in spatial terms. So from there, we can reasonably question, as we often do in real life, why would it not be preferable to simply skip right to the end? After all, isn't the end the point? Yes and no. The end provides contextual meaning for everything that has gone before. It tells us what it all means. But in skipping the second act, I would argue we'd also be skipping all the best parts. So today, let's lift the hood and look a little more metaphorically at the second act. Aside from padding our word count, why is the middle of the story so crucial to a functional story form? One that not only grips readers with drama and pacing, but also resonates on a deeper thematic level. So welcome to today's episode, the real purpose of the second act and why you can't skip it. But first, today's episode is sponsored by Demanza.com. So here's the truth. As we all know, finishing your manuscript is really only half the battle. After that, you've got to figure out covers, formatting, promo graphics, your Amazon page, the works. Is it overwhelming? If you're like me, when I was first getting started, then yeah, probably. But these days, Demanza's Everything package makes it much, much easier. Since 2012, they've been helping thousands of authors, including me, publish with confidence by doing all of it for you, and now in one simple package. You even get personal guidance from Damon himself, the company founder, or a project manager like Robin along the way. No bots, no faceless process. Instead, it's real humans helping you get your book out there. You can visit demanza.com/everything. That's Demanza, the name Damon, DAMONZA.com/everything, and use the code HWBA, that's short for Helping Writers Become Authors, to save 10%. All right, so the second act is more than just filler. Symbolically, the second act is often represented as a quest or a journey. It is the adventure world of the story's main conflict, however that looks from story to story. To understand the significance of the second act, let's go deeper by examining its most important elements. If you are familiar with story structure as I teach it, then you know the second act begins around the 25% mark with the first plot point, which is symbolically a doorway of no return. It journeys through the testing ground of the first pinch point around the 37% mark. It is split by the midpoint at the 50% mark, which symbolically is a moment of truth. It journeys on past further testing in the second pinch point at the 62% mark, and it closes with the third plot point around the 75% mark, which is symbolically a dark night of the soul. So even from such a high altitude perspective, it's obvious the second act offers a journey of psychological and potentially spiritual initiation and transformation. So let's consider the 5 purposes of the second act in story structure. Purpose number 1, crossing the threshold. The first act ends and the second act begins with the character symbolically crossing a threshold. This particular threshold is the first plot point, or the doorway of no return. Now, threshold experiences are essentially initiations. They're shatter points. They are experiences that forever alter one's perspective of self and or the world. And often in films and novels, the first plot point offers up particularly dramatic scenes that force characters to irrevocably leave behind the normal world of the first act. This could be because the normal world is destroyed or return is barred. It could also be because the normal world has been utterly changed in some way, as when a loved one dies. The threshold can also sometimes be less overt, as when characters simply decide to commit to a goal or encounter something, whether positive or negative, that introduces a new element into their lives. For example, meeting a love interest. Regardless, the symbolism of this turning point introduces the middle of the story as a new and wider world in which characters must learn to adapt. And right here, we already see not just the purpose of the second act in story structure, but the point of story in general. And that is to represent an arc of change. When we view the first act as representing the normal world and the second act as representing this new adventure world, we understand that if the characters do not cross this threshold, there is no story. And this is for the simple reason that the characters would not otherwise be challenged or challenge themselves to change in any way. They would be free to continue their lives in exactly the same way. This may be slice of life, but it is not a story arc. Purpose number 2, a quest and a testing ground. So we can look at the 3 acts of story through various helpful analogies. One, which I already mentioned, is seeing the first act as a question, the second act as the argument, and the third act as the answer. We can also see it as the first act as the thesis, second act as the antithesis, and the third act as the synthesis. In either case, it's useful to recognize the second act as a sort of testing ground before the conclusions of the finale. I have often pointed out how the climactic moment at the story's end tells us what the story is really about. And this is because the climactic moment proves how the character's choices in the earlier acts turn out. In order to have this moment of proof, we must first witness characters moving through the testing ground. Thematically, a story tests the various merits of the lie the character believes in contrast to a more expanded thematic truth. That is, a limited perspective in contrast to a more expanded perspective. The story is initiating characters into the opportunity to expand and, through this expansion, to transform. We often see the second act in story structure symbolically represented as a quest, most particularly in the hero's journey. This metaphor of the quest perfectly exemplifies the point and purpose of the second act as an unknown path requiring characters to master both skill and savvy, to tell friend from foe and lie from truth, to let go of what does not serve, and to embrace both the potential of new blessings and the weight of new responsibilities. How characters respond to these varied trials gives us the many variations of possible story arcs, from positive to negative. Perhaps the most definitive beat in the second act is the one at the center of the entire story, the midpoint, or moment of truth. This is a clear waymarker halfway through that demonstrates how well the characters are doing. Have they been successful in rejecting the lie and owning the truth thus far? Have they met their various challenges with grace, virtue, and integrity? Or are they struggling with the urge to give up or to cheat in some way? Are they growing toward strength or collapsing into weakness? Are they integrating power with wisdom, or are they spiraling into either aggression or passivity? In many ways, this central moment in the second act defines the entire story. Whatever happens in the finale results from this moment. Without the moment of truth, the story will lack conviction in the end, or even any point at all. Purpose number 3, the heart of the story. The structural system I teach sees the second act as the longest section of the story, a full 50%. As such, if the second act doesn't work, neither does your story. The second act is where most of the good stuff happens. It's where the battles, the love scenes, the arguments, the comedy, the conflict, and the drama all happen. It defines your story's theme and flavor. The iconic nature of the story, its personality, is defined by the second act. However important in their own functionality, the first and third acts are mere bookends to the meatiness of the second act. Respectively, the first and third acts represent the normal world before characters were initiated by changing circumstances, and eventually the new normal world after characters have been changed by their new perspectives. Seen this way, it is clear the second act is not an appendage to the first and third acts, but rather that the first and third acts exist to supplement and provide context for the real heart of the story, the second act. Purpose number 4, descent into the underworld. The second act closes with the beat that transitions the story into the third act. This beat is the third plot point, the symbolism of which can be variously represented as the low moment, death rebirth, and the dark night of the soul. It is a descent into a psychological underworld as characters reap the consequences of their second act actions, let die what no longer serves, and resurrect into a new version of themselves, for better or worse. Although not yet the end of the story, this is the end of the second act. And if the ending tells us what something is about, then the ending of the second act shows us that the second act's true purpose is to reflect the archetypal birth, death, rebirth cycle. No matter the type of story, this underlying structural symbolism brings weight and resonance. Even small, realistic dilemmas have mythic resonance here. Indeed, one of the most important functions of the second act is to bring this sense of weightiness. Purely from a pacing perspective, a missing or shortened second act will inevitably undermine even the weightiest of themes. If characters can step easily from question to answer, then was the question, and therefore the answer, really that important? Purpose number 5, entertainment and verisimilitude. From a reader's standpoint, the second act is where the story entertains. We may think we buy our popcorn for the spectacle and tension of the climax, but really we're there for the second act. This is where 90% of a story's best moments happen. If the second act is good enough, sometimes we'll even forgive a weak climax. The second act offers the necessary space and time for audiences to watch as characters realistically work through cause and effect. This verisimilitude is necessary for suspension of disbelief, just as it is necessary to create the kind of transformative character arcs that affect not just characters, but audiences. Powerful stories have the capacity to create deeply initiatory and transformative experiences in as little as 2 hours. But that kind of symbolic alchemy is only possible via detailed second acts that authentically represent the steps of change from the inside out. So, in closing, the second act is not optional or extraneous. It is the proving ground of transformation. Without it, stories lack both symbolic resonance and emotional payoff. Although writers understandably place much focus and importance on the hook in the first act and the satisfying finale of the third act, the real magic happens in the second act. A successfully executed second act will almost always translate to a successful story experience. Now, if you'd like to go deeper into mastering your second act, my brand new Structuring Your Novel workbook, the revised and expanded second edition, is designed to guide you step by step through this crucial part of story structure. With multiple chapters devoted specifically to the second act, you'll find detailed breakdowns, prompts, and exercises to help you flesh out your adventure world and its symbolic purpose, map your story's key beats, including the midpoint and pinch points, strengthen pacing and thematic development across the long middle stretch, and ensure your second act builds toward a powerful and resonant climax. So whether you're struggling with the murky middle or just want a clearer, more confident approach to story structure, the workbook provides practical tools to help you shape a second act that's both entertaining and meaningful. The Structuring Your Novel workbook, revised and expanded second edition, is available as an ebook, paperback, and also a deluxe special edition fillable PDF, which means you can fill it out on your computer and reuse it as many times as you'd like. So I hope you'll stop by the site to check that out and also to comment on the post that goes with this podcast and tell me your opinion. What is the hardest part for you when writing the second act of your story? Is it the structure, the pacing, or keeping your characters' arcs moving forward? And that brings us to the end of this episode of Helping Writers Become Authors. I hope you'll stop by the site for a full transcript of this episode and to join in the conversation in the comments. Tune in for next week's episode, where we'll continue to explore all things writing and storytelling. If you'd like to support the podcast, it always means a ton when you take a moment to leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, or Spotify. To stay updated on all the latest content I create for you, the best way is to join my mailing list at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com/mailing list. You'll also immediately gain access to lots of free resources, including my books, Crafting Unforgettable Characters and 5 Secrets of Story Structure. For real-time connection with me, more writing advice, and behind-the-scenes glimpses, follow me on Instagram at authorkmwyland. A heartfelt thank you to each one of you for your support and enthusiasm, and especially those of you who support my work on patreon.com/kmwyland. You help make my site, this podcast, and so many other resources available to writers everywhere. So until next week, Keep writing, keep dreaming, and most importantly, keep being true to your stories. Thank you for being part of helping writers become authors.